Good afternoon and welcome to the Northeast Clean Freight Corridors, our 2017 webinar series. We are so happy to have all of you with us today and helping us to kick off our 2017 series. And certainly we have a number of good discussions lined up and we're excited to share them with you. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alicia Gildy, and I'm the Northeast Regional Director for CalSTART, a national clean transportation organization. I am also the chair of the Strategic Planning Committee for the Northeast Diesel Collaborative, and I'm joined here by the Northeast Diesel Collaborative and the Strategic Planning team, and we're just delighted to have you and to start off this new discussion series. Certainly there is a lot of important work to do, and there's a lot of important work that's underway, and we look forward to working with you as we look to promote clean freight corridors in the Northeast. So I was delighted as I was looking at the registration for today's webinar. We had about 79 folks register for today's meeting, which is extremely excited. I looked through the list and I noticed a number of folks that had joined us at our Troy meeting in November of 2016, which is great, and we're so happy to have you back. And I've also noticed that we have a number of new folks that have joined us today. So welcome. We're excited to have you join us today, and we look forward to working with you. So let's go ahead and get started, and let me share with you today's agenda. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to give you an overview of our progress over 2016 and just recap some of the key outcomes of our 2016 Troy meeting, our Clean Corridors meeting in Troy, New York last November. And then I will also share with you our 2017 roadmap, where we're going to go from here. Then we have a number of great presenters that we have invited to share an update on their clean corridor projects, whether it's their alternative fuel designation corridor by the Federal Highway Administration, or it's a partnership that they're looking to pursue, or even a regional freight plan. We have a number of folks that are going to be sharing with you basically where their projects stand, whether it's a designated corridor, whether they're flag ready or if they're in standby, what the intentions or plans of putting up signage. The other aspect is looking at where there might be some planning, current planning or future planning, and looking at how we might be able to align some clean transportation projects along these corridors, where there might be some partnership opportunities. And this is also a really great opportunity to understand and evaluate what needs our partners might have from us and see how the Northeast Clean Freight Corridor Workgroup can further support and enhance their efforts. And then we'll conclude with a work group discussion. So we do have a number of presentations today, and what I would like to do is go through each of our presentations, and then we'll share basically at the very end a very good discussion of different questions that we not only have for our panelists, but that we have for you as well. And so we look forward to engaging with you in a good discussion. Just a little housekeeping to make sure that you can participate via audio during the discussion phase. Make sure that you've included your audio pin, and when you called in, you're able to actually, even while you're on the conference line, enter in your audio pin and then push pound, and that should be able to trigger your ability to join us verbally toward the end of the program. If not, you can always enter a question in the question box, and we'll make sure to address your questions there. I've also attached today's presentation to this webinar, so you should be able to download that and have that for your future reference, and certainly you can share it with anyone. All right, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about where we've been. So for many of you who've been a part of our efforts over the last year, you've taken part in a pathway of which we've covered a number of topics and issues that we look to address and understand and figure out how we can more effectively work and collaborate as a region to promote clean freight corridors. If you're new to the group, just so you know, as an outcome of a 2015 Northeast Diesel Collaborative Partners meeting, we decided and realized, working with various industry partners across all transportation modes and across all agencies of transportation, energy, and environment, that we realized that there is a critical need to align ourselves to help coordinate priorities, looking at our transportation system and figure out how we can work together more effectively as a region to promote clean freight corridors. And that's what really started this great pathway in 2016 of evaluating needs and making sure that we're pulling together some really good discussion topics so that we can address those areas and figure out how we can overcome barriers and continue to work forward in a progressive way. So just to highlight some of what we discussed in the last year through this roadmap, it was when we kicked off back in 2016 in February, it was just a really important opportunity to review why we were doing this. Of course, around that time and in March, what we realized with the funding, there was a lot of funding available through FastLane, through Tiger, as well as DARA, that it was very important that we took that an opportunity to talk about opportunities of promoting clean transportation and clean freight corridors through those funding mechanisms, since that money was then available, looking at where we might be able to pull some project partners together or support partner applications. Then to really understand kind of the freight flows within the region, we had invited our 95 Corridor Coalition, Mary Grace Parker, as well as we invited our friends from the Federal Highway Administration and Cambridge Systematics to basically share with us kind of the flow patterns throughout the region, help us understand what where there's bottlenecks, congestion points, where there's some intermodal layover locations, really to just help us understand where we might want to be focusing some of our efficiency improvements, some of our alternative fuel infrastructure projects along these areas so we can reduce congestion, improve efficiency, and improve air quality in those areas. So it was a really informative opportunity. And then really just to understand, kind of leading up to the FAST Act in Section 1413, and Diane Turchetta working with Mike Scarpino and others to really lead this whole designation process, it was an opportunity for us as a region to kind of figure out how do we define clean corridors? What are the various aspects that we consider as we think about clean corridors? It's the technologies, it's the opportunities, it's the challenges, it's the looking at where we're connecting, whether it's ports, whether it's rail, whether it's on road, whether it's marine highways, really just trying to understand how do we define clean corridors. And then working with our state DOT partners, we help support 3 different Federal Highway Administration alternative fuel corridor designation applications. So it was a really great opportunity of bringing in our Clean City coordinators, bringing in some of our technology partners, and looking at how we could further support and talk about this critical application process so that we can work with Federal Highways to support nominations for alternative fuel corridor applications, which was actually a really great and opportune time for us to do that. Also, what we did is, because Clean Cities are a very important partner to all the important clean transportation work that we do, we also wanted to make sure that we were bringing in our boots on the ground that are supporting all of our state agencies with the implementation of clean transportation projects to talk about what do we need to be factoring in as we think about building out our infrastructure to promote alternative fuels. What are the various players in terms of the private and public sector that we need to consider so that we're making sure that we're aligning priorities, we're aligning funding and opportunities that are going to be more sustainable. And then lastly, leading up to our Clean Corridors meeting, ultimately what we wanted to do at the Troy meeting was recap what we learned and then figure out what is our pathway moving forward. And it was, again, a really wonderful opportunity for us to bring in all the different transportation sectors, whether it's rail, whether it's port, whether it's trucking and off-road. It was a great opportunity for us to bring everyone together along with all of our state agencies and federal partners and our technology and fuel suppliers to talk about a regional partnership to move clean freight corridors forward. So then let me just bring us into, and this is just an example of, we provided a letter of support on behalf of the Northeast Clean Freight Corridor Initiative as well as our Northeast Clean City coalitions also supported with this letter, this partnership letter that we had submitted for Vermont DOT, Connecticut DOT, and New York State DOT. So looking back at our Troy meeting on November 3rd and 4th of 2016, we had a very successful meeting. I think many felt empowered by the partnership opportunity that came together to talk about how do we further move clean freight corridors forward, how do we continue to support the Federal Highway Administration's alternative fuel corridor designation process, how do we help fill in the infrastructure gap, who are the partners, and how do we continue to engage. So just to share a little pictures from our event here, we were honored. We had Greg Nadeau, who was the administrator for the Federal Highway Administration. He chose our venue. We were extremely lucky to announce the alternative fuel corridor designations. And you see Diane Truchetta there holding the sign. Once these highways become signage ready, this is one of the signs that will be along the highway. So anyway, we had about 160 folks in attendance. We had really good engaging discussions. We wanted to make sure that folks were really feeling given the opportunity to speak up and to share their perspectives, and for us to record the really good ideas and the needs so that we were somewhat kind of walking away with a clear action plan. At this meeting, we also had a number of different technologies on display, from all-electric transit buses, all-electric port terminal operating equipment. We had natural gas trucks. We had hybrid vehicles. We had electric charging stations provided by ChargePoint. Anyway, it was a really successful event. And I think from the feedback that we've heard from most people, I think folks are looking for another event like this. So we're hoping to bring that to you. All right, so moving on, what I want to share with you is our 2017 Northeast Clean Freight Corridor strategy and how that leads into our 2017 roadmap. So what we want to do is we want to leverage our learnings from our 2016 roadmap, and I just reviewed that with you, and also the outcomes of our Troy meeting to help set priorities for this year. What we want to do is we want to identify new partners. During our discussion at the Troy meeting, there were a number of really good ideas in terms of additional stakeholders that we should bring into the room as we talk about promoting clean freight corridors in the region. So certainly that is definitely going to be a part of our effort. We want to work with you to bring on as many people and appropriate stakeholders as possible to help this effort. We also want to do a more effective job at raising awareness, and this webinar series is really that opportunity. We also record all of these webinars and make them available online so that folks can view them at a later date or share them with their partners. So we want to do a very effective job at raising awareness, looking at how we can engage and create buy-in with other private and public stakeholders, and looking at how we can work together to move this effort forward. One of the hot topics during our Troy meeting was the VW settlement funds, in particular Appendix D, and a lot of discussion on how we might be able to prioritize funds, working with the state beneficiaries on looking at clean corridor projects. And so that is something that we want to ensure that is in part of our conversation and work with our states to look at where there might be opportunities there. We want to create a funding timeline, so we want to understand what funding opportunities are out there. How might we want to start planning for them in advance and start pulling together project partner concepts so that we're ready to go with these really great projects and that we can secure funding in a timely manner to help roll them out. We want to present technologies. Another outcome from the Troy meeting was that folks wanted to have a better understanding of where technologies are working successfully. Where do they make the most sense? We understand that all electric may not be a one-size-fits-all approach across all transportation sectors. Well, we are seeing some good direction there, but again, it's the idea of understanding where technologies are being applied successfully, and where we're seeing technology going, and making sure that we're applying technology where it's going to make the most sense and be successful. We also want to work with our states in the Northeast to identify and define hotspots, so that we are prioritizing where we need to be implementing clean transportation projects to help reduce congestion, to help reduce air pollution, especially around sensitive communities, environmental justice communities. So just understanding where our hotspots are and looking at where we might want to focus our attention there. Also, another issue that came out of our meeting and through our discussion last year was looking at idle reduction at truck stops. And so just understanding, you know, how we can support trucker needs and making sure that they have resources, looking at where might we be able to provide electrification, also looking at where we might be able to co-locate other fuels like natural gas. So that is another very important topic of consideration that we want to talk about in this year's webinar series. And then as we lead up into our partners meeting, we do want to look at how we might be able to fill in the infrastructure gap. And so our discussion, and I'll show you the roadmap in a minute here, but really what we want to do is kind of cover these different focus areas and then kind of think about as a region, we understand where the designated corridors are, where there's signage ready, where there's some pending. Let's look at different facilities and prioritize hotspots, if you will, and figure out how we might be able to further out and implement infrastructure projects to fill in that infrastructure gap. And that's something that we want to work very closely with all of you, and we see that being a very important discussion topic at our partners meeting come the end of September. And then as you see in this last bullet here, we want to have all of this great discussion along our roadmap lead us to our partners meeting in September. We want to make sure it makes sense, make sure that we're hitting all the critical points. If we need to evolve and include other subtopics, we want to make sure that we do that. So we're going to look to you to get your feedback to make sure that we're providing the most informative discussion webinar series for you. All right. So let's take a look at the roadmap for this year. You may have received an email from me basically outlining the webinars that we're going to be having over the next 5 months. This here is the roadmap, basically showing you the titles of the different webinars in the month. We will be holding these webinars every 4th Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. through 3:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The purpose for that is we realize that 60 minutes is never enough time because a lot of folks want to continue to engage with discussion. We want to make sure we provide that opportunity. So thank you for holding out with us for a 90-minute call. So we're having our first call today. We're giving you an update, and we want to hear from our partners how they're doing with their Clean Corridor projects and their designation status. And then what we want to do is the next 2 webinars, one in June 22nd and then July 27th. The first one will be looking at gaseous and liquid fuels and infrastructure needs in the Northeast. The third webinar, we're going to be looking at electrification, idle reduction, hybrid technologies. So again, these are going to be very technology, fuel-focused conversations and looking at infrastructure, looking at the various technologies that are available, maybe looking at example projects that might better inform your decision as you look at building out infrastructure within your states and the partners that you'll need to make that happen. And then the fourth webinar, we want to work with you on, now that we understand these technologies and where they make sense and where there's some really good opportunities in the Northeast, it's an opportunity for us to prioritize locations and facility types to look at how we might be able to grow out the infrastructure to help reduce emissions, to help promote clean transportation, and look at how we can promote our clean freight corridors. The last webinar will be September 7th. It will be the same month of our partners meeting, but really that meeting will be an opportunity for us to make sure that we're collecting from you all the questions, all the good ideas that we want to make sure that we're pouring into our discussion at the partners meeting as we think about filling in the infrastructure gap. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we plan to discuss over the next 5 webinars. We're really excited about this. We have a number of good presenters and stakeholders that are looking to take part in these calls, and we're definitely excited for you to continue joining us. All right, so I'm going to stop with my piece now, and we're going to start introducing some of our great presenters and partners who've been working with us from the very beginning. And no better to start with my dear friend Diane Furchetta from the Federal Highway Administration, who's just been a key leader in moving this whole alternative fuel corridor designation process forward in partnership with some other really great stakeholders who've been just wonderful to work with. So Diane, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll just go ahead and advance the slides for you when you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I hear you. Great.
Okay, great, great, great. Okay, we can go to the first slide. What I really wanted to do is just tell you all a little bit about the outcomes of the first designation process, the first call for nominations, and then tell you a little bit about where we plan to go in the future. So the initial process, I'm sure you all remember last July there was a Federal Register notice published that asked for nominations from state and local officials to designate corridors around the country. We received 34 nominations, and we quickly separated those nominations into two categories, one being signage ready, meaning that the corridor being designated had the facilities, met our criteria, and had facilities on it spaced every few miles depending on which fuel and was within 5 miles of the corridor or interstate. So that they fell into a category that was signage ready, meaning that the state DOT could go ahead and put up signage, install signage on the corridor, and some signage on ramps directing folks, drivers to alternative fuel facilities. The other category was, of course, signage pending, meaning that the corridor was designated, but there weren't really enough facilities, weren't sufficient facilities along the corridor yet to warrant signage. So I wish I could tell you that being designated meant you all got a big pot of money to spend on infrastructure, but basically, according to the FAST Act, we had no dollars, no funding along with this provision. But what it basically did is, as I just explained, put you into a category that was signage ready or signage pending, and put you on some of the maps that you've seen on the Alternative Fuel Corridor website, Federal Highway. So during this process, we worked closely with Department of Energy's NREL folks and their headquarter Clean Cities folks. The Alternative Fuel Data Center, our maps are in sync with them, and we have an effort, continuing effort with them, I'll talk about a little bit later, to make sure the next round of designations also that we are in sync with the AFDC maps. So the first time around, we focused, the call actually in the Federal Register that was published, the notice that was published asked for corridors on the interstate and feeder roads into the interstate. And when those applications came in, we quickly realized that we were overwhelmed and couldn't really focus on anything except the interstate system, with the exception of a few major state roads and highways like 101 on the West Coast and Route 50 on the East Coast. So as this next round of designations, as we make the call to go out, we'll still be focusing on the interstate system. We encountered a lot of issues with smaller state roads and highways that we couldn't even find them on the GIS mapping. So we quickly had to just focus on the interstate, and I think that's appropriate, being that that's the first, the corridors are really the first thing we're trying to build out. So next slide, Alicia. So the corridors from the first round of designations included portions or segments of 55 interstates across the country, and as I mentioned, a few state roads and highways. It comprised 35 states plus DC and covered almost 85,000 miles of the national highway system. So some of the corridors that really are signage ready and really are serving as great examples in terms of what we're trying to do with the corridor program are, of course, I-5 on the West Coast for electric vehicles, and I-95 on the East Coast, especially the Northeast section for electric vehicles. And I think you'll hear from Marianne or Marcy a little bit later about I-80, which, of course, runs east to west across the country, could be, with some gaps filled in, hopefully through this next designation, a really good example for a CNG corridor. Just a few tools I wanted to mention to help folks along. Recently, there was posted a report, Innovative Financing to Support Alternative Fuel Infrastructure, on the Alternative Fuels Corridor website. And I will admit, this was a 2014 requirement in the Transportation Appropriations Bill. And I think it kind of fell into a black hole a little while at the vast bureaucracy at DOT, but we revived it and updated it based on the FAST Act, and it's up on the website for you to look at. It basically goes through some of the more traditional funding sources like CMAQ, but also touches on some really innovative finance mechanisms that could be used but haven't been used yet, like TIFIA and private activity bonds. Also, in a separate effort that we are working on with the Oregon Department of Transportation and a couple other state DOTs are involved in this effort, which is a pooled fund to create, basically to have a series of alternative fuel workshops across the country and create out of those workshops useful toolkits that have various fact sheets and just outreach materials that people can take a look at based on the subject matter of the alternative fuel workshop that took place. If you go to that website, you'll see that I'm not going to go through all of them, but 5 workshops have taken place on various topics, including fleets and lessons learned from the I-5 corridor on the West Coast. So I would encourage you to go to that toolkit website and take a look at the materials out there. Could be very helpful to you in your efforts to promote AFVs and the infrastructure. So next slide. So as I mentioned, can you back one, Alicia? Thanks. The next steps. One of the things we did after the first round is had a few meetings with industries such as Natural Gas Association, the propane folks, and hydrogen, and we met with the Electric Drive Transportation Association, EDTA, and just kind of touch base with them to see what they thought about the process and things that we can do better next time. So those meetings with industry were very helpful, and we'll be taking all those things into consideration when we draft the next public register, Federal Register notice. We also had a webinar on March 7th, and don't be offended if you weren't invited. It was basically to have a little bit of a conversation with the folks who nominated corridors the first time around, and basically to build a community of practice and to reach out to them and see what we could do better this time. So after the next release, which we're aiming for July of this summer to release the Federal Register notice, we'll have another public webinar, and you all can call in. It's be open to everyone. You call in and ask us questions and kind of why we made the decisions we did. So of course we'll let you know when that webinar will occur. And the future designation process, you know, you have to remember it provides ability to nominate new corridors for those who nominated last time, or to add various other types of fuels to existing corridors. And one thing we heard loud and clear is you did not have enough time last time around, and that was 30 days was not enough time. We were under a lot of pressure to have the corridors designated, so we will have allow more time this second round of nominations. I would love to give you 90 days. We'll see if we can do that. If not, maybe a little less. And just a reminder, the nominations can come from any state or local official. It does not have to be through your state DOT. However, I always try to emphasize that it's always a good idea to include your state DOT, because they do have jurisdiction over the corridors and can really help the application along. And once again, just a little bit on the collaboration with the Department of Energy. We now have an official interagency agreement in place that there are GIS folks and all the folks at NREL who run the AFDC site will be helping us. We have a in-person meeting to go over the process with them coming up in July, and also just to figure out basically the flow of information and what our folks are doing at Federal Highway versus the folks at NREL. So that's a very good thing that we're ironing that all out. The process will go much smoother this time. So next slide, Alicia. And just a little bit about the website. I'm sure you've all visited, at least perused the website a little, but it does have a lot of great interactive GIS maps on for each fuel. There is also a report required under the FAST Act that's posted on there. There's, of course, the famous MUTCD memorandum that spells out some overall policy for the location and size, some specifics of the signage. There's the materials there from the March 7th webinar I mentioned, and there's also a one-page handout that could be useful and that provides you some information on the program. And there's also a listserv on there that you can sign up for, put your web address in, so when we put something on the website or when we send out the next Federal Register notice, you'll receive an update that's available for you. And so very important that you go in on the listserv and sign up. That really helps us out. And I think we'll end with a list of contacts. As Alicia said in the beginning, my contact information is there, and Mike Scarpino and Stephen Costa from the Volpe Center. We are kind of the three musketeers on this corridor program, and if you have any questions, feel free to let us know, but there'll be lots of upcoming activity and information regarding the next round of designations. I think that's it, Alicia.
Great, Diane, wonderful. Thank you for your presentation. Very good overview and update. I wanted to note that we are getting some questions in, and I want to thank everyone for starting to get them out there, and I know we're really excited to get responses to your questions. What we're going to do, because we do have a number of speakers, we're going to continue with the program, but hold tight. And as you've documented your questions in the question box, we'll make sure we'll cover everything. So even if you have to check out earlier on the call, we'll have this recorded, and we'll make sure that we'll get all the responses to everyone's questions. So please stand by, and thank you so much for your patience. All right. I'm very excited to introduce Marcy Rood and Marianne Mintz from the Argonne National Laboratory. They're going to give an update on the I-80 corridor initiative, and I know that it's been a pretty successful partnership and ongoing really good discussion, so we're delighted to have you ladies with us today. And please go ahead and get started and let me know, and I'll advance the slide for you.
Thank you, Alicia. This is Marianne. I'm going to start, and we're going to do this as a tag team. Basically, I'll basically provide the presentation, but then Marcy may have to handle questions because I have to jump off at 2 o'clock. I have 2 o'clock my time. I apologize. I didn't realize it was a 90-minute call. First of all, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity. This is you have a great collaboration going on, and we appreciate the ability to coordinate our efforts and to learn from you guys. This is a much younger effort. This activity began basically with preparations to respond to the RFI under FAST, and we put together a rather extensive group of partners, not just the Clean Cities coordinators along the length of the corridor that we were proposing, but also a number of representatives from the various the fuels industry and from the different infrastructure suppliers. And I just wanted to also mention that this invitation came up rather recently, and personally it provided a good incentive to write up my notes from a meeting that we had 2 days ago. So they're hot off the press, and I'll fill you in on what we've been discussing. And I also wanted to thank Alicia and Abby for being so nimble with the agenda, since I do have to jump off. I appreciate that. So basically, the next, if you advance to the next slide, the I-80 corridor nomination. So let me apologize first of all. This is not an eye test. It's pretty blurry. Sorry, this was pulled out of the application, and in blowing it up for the PowerPoint, it got pretty fuzzy. The point here is that our nomination focuses on the eastern half, from Des Moines to the eastern terminus of I-80. So we include the states of Iowa up to the border with Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey up to the border with New York. And I just want to mention that our application, though it only goes to Nebraska, and it's something like 1,200 miles, I believe, basically abuts a similar application that was submitted by Nebraska, which I believe is also one of the part of the corridor on the FHWA website. And then there's other work that's been going on in the other parts of the corridor heading west through, I believe it was Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada, which is being sponsored by DOE, and hopefully that will be added on in the next round. And then in California, the portion of I-80 I believe was included in California's submission. So it's very close to being a coast-to-coast corridor. And the neat thing about that is, in this image, it shows how central it is to freight. And Diane mentioned that it also could very likely be a CNG corridor from coast to coast because of the availability of the existing CNG infrastructure. But there's also a number of other fuels as well, and so we proposed under all of them. In most cases, it's infrastructure pending, but work is going on in those areas. And next slide, please. I just wanted to show the this is out of the FAST Act application. Some of the intermodal facilities and other interstates and rail lines that intersect. So you can see that it's heavily a freight-dominated corridor, although the application itself is both for light-duty and heavy-duty vehicles. And in fact, we've also proposed or applied for funding under the VW settlement, under the Electrify America portion, to basically fund the planning for EV infrastructure along that corridor. The other thing I wanted to mention is the I-80 effort in the is mentioned in the public document that's been released by Electrify America, and it's actually one of the largest potential funding areas that they're looking at in terms of the station requirements and funds needed. But we don't really know what's likely to transpire under that. There's expectation that Electrify America will release their plan. We'll certainly comment more on their plans and be more specific at the upcoming EV roadmap meeting in Portland. And a number of the people among our partners will be at that meeting, including Marcy, I believe. The other comment I wanted to make is funding under the VW's consent decree that was mentioned by Alicia. Not all the states in our corridor have named the agencies that will administer their funds. A lot of that work is still going on, but we are discussing that as well among the group, and we're hopeful that funds will be available from that source. Another area that we talked about in our call this past week is utility outreach, and we're very appreciative that we have support from GTI, and they have offered to help us in that area. So we're hopeful that we'll have more information, particularly on the natural gas side. We also discussed funding availability and a number of different opportunities under CMAQ in different portions of the area, and a number of the partners are involved in those efforts. We spent a lot of time talking about signage, and Diane alluded to a lot of that. It's being discussed in several of the communities in our area. And that varies by state and by fuel. Some areas there are already signs up, particularly for natural gas, mostly at big service plazas, and they were posted prior to the FAST Act. The question is, how consistent are they with FHWA recommendations? And if not, is there a way to make them more consistent? So there's a lot of discussion about that, a lot of interest in that, and there is desire, at least at this point, to continue that discussion at the upcoming AASHTO meetings. And so we spent a lot of time talking about those meetings, and hopefully in July at the AASHTO meeting in Cleveland, we'll have a more specific discussion on that, and we'll keep people posted posted on that. We've already been in touch with several of the neighboring states, particularly Minnesota. They've done a lot of work in that area. And we've also been talking to people in Iowa, and I know Pennsylvania has been involved. And so there's a lot of activity there. We have several issues that are affecting our work going forward in terms of how we're going to organize our efforts, whether we're going to organize them by subject matter or fuel or in some other way, and that has not been decided. As I mentioned earlier, we're a younger group than the Clean Corridors, but we have a tremendous amount of interest, and we've been very pleased at the response that we've been getting. And with that, I'll turn it back to Alicia as a quick summary. As far as contacting myself and Marcy, they can provide, Alicia, Diane, and Abby can provide our contact information, but in general, it's quite simple. I am MMINTZ at ANL.gov, and Marcy is MROOD at ANL.gov. So I'll be happy to answer further questions and certainly to engage with this community more. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marianne, and thanks for joining us today. I know you have a tight schedule. Great to hear your presentation and really good updates. Thank you very much. All right, now I will turn it over to Matthew Getz with the Georgetown Climate Center. He's going to provide an update on the TCI and Regional EV Corridors Initiative. Matthew, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Alicia. So yeah, as Alicia said, I'm Matthew Getz from Georgetown Climate Center. For those who might not be familiar with us, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan institute located at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and we support state efforts and work to inform federal policy with the lessons from the states. And one of the initiatives that we help to facilitate is the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And you can move to the next slide. And so the Transportation and Climate Initiative is the collaboration of the 10 states plus the District of Columbia, or sorry, 11 states plus the District of Columbia from DC up to Maine. And it's a multi-agency collaboration of the state energy, environment, and transportation agencies. And this group was created in 2010 and has continued working together to reduce emissions from the transportation sector and promote the clean energy economy in the region. And we've worked across a number of areas, including clean vehicles and fuels, but also on sustainable community promotion and doing some analysis of regional freight flows. And I know a number of TCI state officials are on this call, so do please feel free to add to the overview that I'm providing here. Next slide. So as was mentioned, a number of the states in this region submitted nominations for alternative fuel corridors, including electric vehicle corridors. We hope to facilitate a regional nomination that Vermont Agency of Transportation led, and we're really excited that that all the states in the TCI ultimately submitted corridor nominations. Next slide. So over 2,500 miles of signage-ready EV corridors ultimately were designated in the TCI region in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. And so here's a map of those both signage-ready and signage-pending corridors, just to provide a little bit of context. Next slide. So we see the corridors as a really critical component of widespread EV adoption, and that also right now we're at a potentially a really exciting inflection point for long-distance travel along EV corridors. We've got extended range, newly affordable EV models that are coming available. High-speed charging and increasingly higher and higher speed DC fast charging will increase the convenience of travel and recharging along the way. And there's also a sort of staggering amount of infrastructure investment coming in from the VW settlement, but from many other sources as well. And so as these corridors are built out and the signage begins to be deployed showing consumers that they're driving along an alternative fuel electric vehicle corridor, it could be a really important opportunity to increase consumer awareness of EVs if this signage will be seen by millions of drivers. But the really effective corridor development is something of a challenge. There's significant barriers from utility regulatory issues to currently not a great business case for DC fast charging, and significant coordination is needed both between agencies and states, as well as with private stakeholders as investments are made. So here's some examples of news headlines of different types of investments from automakers, charging network providers like ChargePoint, of course the Tesla network of superchargers, and others. Next slide. The VW settlement was just mentioned. There's certainly a lot of activity in that space with this first announcement of 30 months where $40 million will be invested in charging infrastructure in 11 urban areas, plus $190 million in DC fast charging along U.S. interstates at 240 sites or so, and some of that will include this new higher capacity 150 kilowatt charging, which has some exciting implications, but also challenges. Next slide. And finally, there's an increasing investment by electric utilities to directly operate and own or provide the make-ready infrastructure for EV charging. On the West Coast in all 3 states, the utilities have either already made investments and are making investments through approved programs or have proposed programs, including in Washington, Oregon, and in California. And that's providing an exciting example. And it looks like there's a lot of interest on the East Coast as well in the TCI region. In Massachusetts, there have already been proposals by Eversource and National Grid to install infrastructure, including make-ready investments in fast charging infrastructure along corridors. So that's another exciting opportunity to grow charging infrastructure. Next slide. So to get a better sense of the state of charging infrastructure along these designated corridors, we've been working with the states through the Transportation and Climate Initiative to conduct a multi-state technical analysis of this charging infrastructure. And to kick this off, we've been working and engaging with a number of different states and utility experts to sort of learn what kind of analysis has already been conducted and how we may want to scope ours. And so that's included outreach to the West Coast states who are working on the West Coast Electric Highway, to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and also to utilities, including to Pacific Gas and Electric. And we're working to, as I said, get a better understanding of the state of charging infrastructure right now and identify any other opportunities for additional coordination. Next slide. So some of these other resources that are already available to analyze charging infrastructure, the current state as well as future needs. I mentioned the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They are conducting an analysis along with U.S. Department of Energy to identify the amount of charging infrastructure that will be needed for corridors across the country under different EV option scenarios moving towards 2030, which I think will be a really important resource. And that's building on some statewide analyses that they have already conducted for California and more recently for Massachusetts that shows the amount of charging infrastructure that may be needed and also looks at the different types of infrastructure and what amount of fast charging, what amount of level 2, et cetera. So that's going to be a really helpful resource once that is finalized. The Pacific Gas and Electric, the utility in the San Francisco Bay Area and with a large service territory in California, they've conducted a really comprehensive analysis that looks at priority sites where additional DC fast chargers might be needed, as well as specific locations for those fast chargers that would be grid optimized. So sites that would minimize additional investments in the electric distribution infrastructure by identifying transformers that have sufficient capacity. So that was a really impressive undertaking, and they've made it all very accessible through an online tool that's available on their website. And then finally, we've been talking with the Oregon Department of Transportation and looking at the sort of corridor gap analysis they've been conducting to promote the West Coast Electric Highway. Next slide. So our TCI analysis, we've just kicked this off, so I don't have any exciting results to share with you yet. The map on this slide it comes from the FHWA website, which already has some really great GIS information about the alternative fuel corridors that have been designated. So we're looking to build from that resource and add a little bit more to get a better sense specifically of the state of DC fast charging infrastructure along these corridors, and to identify any key gaps along the designated or proposed corridors. And we're also using some different parameters to look at where there may be some priority investment opportunities, including by looking at vehicle travel volume data, economic activity in sites along corridors, and looking at tourism locations, which has been a priority for a number of states to make sure that drivers who have an electric vehicle but want to go to a ski resort or to the beach are able to do so. Next slide. So I think this is my last slide. As I said, we've kicked off this technical analysis and it's still underway. We're hoping to have some results to share over the course of this summer. And then I've already begun discussions of how we might be able to share our findings through webinars or other meetings in the fall and afterwards to talk about the results of the analysis and any opportunities to further build out these EV corridors in the region. So that's everything that I had. I've got my contact information on the next slide, and I'd certainly be happy to discuss any of this with anyone who's interested.
Matthew, thank you so much. What an impressive presentation and update. Certainly you're continuing to make a lot of progress, and it's exciting to see the possibilities and just how strong the network is growing in the Northeast. And thanks for all your great work there and partnership with us. We're lucky to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Oh, of course. Next, I'm going to invite my partner, Abby Swain from EPA Region 1. She's going to provide an update. Basically, she was able to garner some good information from the application that was submitted on behalf of New York State, basically just to give an update there. So, Abby, I'll turn it over to you, my dear, to provide us with an overview of New York State's designated corridors.
Great, and thanks, Alicia. I want to make it clear that I'm kind of pinch hitting here because Ron Epstein and Alan Ward, who've been very helpful to us and are the main contacts at New York State DOT on this designated corridor, couldn't be with us today for purposes of having conflicts. So I'm just going to, this is going to be sort of a placeholder just to keep this visible to everyone in this group. Next slide. So, I'm not going to recite this because you can read it pretty well, but, a lot of New York State is designated for electric, not so much for CNG or LPG, but definitely, a lot of the state is covered. And so I think they have a very ambitious and thorough program underway, lots going on. Next slide. This is just a depiction of the layout of where those major corridors are, just to give you the sort of geographic perspective. Next slide. And then here are some highlights that I pulled out from the application. There are a lot of public fueling stations for various alternative fuels already as of last summer. They have a really good spread of electric vehicle charging facilities at close proximity to one another, so no range anxiety there. They have appropriately spaced CNG facilities pretty much for their whole network coming online soon. At least that was the prediction as of last summer. NYSERDA, of course, has been very active in this space for quite some time. They are adding hundreds of new level 2 facilities by approximately the end of 2017, most on the designated corridors. And they have a purchasing collaborative under development or already underway by now, and are developing plug standards to make it more easier to predict what equipment to have. They tend to focus on 5 major metropolitan areas on I-90 in adding EV facilities. They are concentrating EV and hydrogen facilities at metropolitan areas. New York City DEC is really helping a lot with that. And for existing commercial truck stops, they're examining the prospect for alternative fuels. So that's it in a nutshell. And what's the next slide, Alicia? I forget. Is that more of me or is that back to you? Ah, here we go. How could I forget? This is a list of the intermodal facilities that intersect with or are adjacent to or on the proposed corridors and the designated corridors. So they are definitely thinking about freight in their designated corridor development. So that's good news for us. And what's the next slide, Alicia? Is that it? All right. That was fast, but it's about at my level of knowledge, and we'll have more from New York State DOT in the future.
Yeah, Abby, I think that last slide we needed 3D glasses. Sorry, everyone, for the fuzziness.
Yeah, don't get woozy.
But it made its point. Great. Thank you, Abby. Thanks so much. All right. Now we'll turn it over to our friend Jerry Bogas, who's the Planning Director for the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. He's going to provide an update on the NECFC Regional Freight Plan and as it relates to the inclusion of clean freight corridors. Jerry, over to you.
Thanks, Alicia. I guess you can go to the only slide at this point. There we go. So we call this figure the football helmet, actually, and it shows the way we've identified truck movements in our next regional freight plan, and it could be a good indication of how we proceed with developing clean freight corridors in a metropolitan region. So this is my only slide. I'm simply going to give a status report, and then Alicia, I also have to jump off for a 3 o'clock call. So where we are is that we have issued publicly on May 1st, we issued our draft regional transportation plan, which would begin with federal fiscal year 2018. And part of that, an appendix to that, is our draft regional freight plan. And in that document, which we've been developing now for a year and a half, 2 years, we do have an item for clean freight corridor programs. And that whole development, that is part of our program and policy recommendations in the freight plan. That whole development came really from the public portion of the development process, particularly through our Freight Transportation Working Group, when New York City DOT and Alicia and the Northeast Diesel Collaborative proposed that one way to begin to develop clean freight corridors at a regional level would be to institutionalize them in the planning process. And so although we didn't have the resources in drafting the entire regional plan to actually identify corridors, we made it clear that that's the next step amongst many. That's the next step for clean freight corridors, building off of the designations that have already been made. Right now, we are in a 30-day public review period that ends on May 30th. We've done a number of public review meetings, and we also have various online mechanisms for commenting. Once that's finished, we have to respond to the comments we've received, and by the end of June, we hope to have an adopted new plan by our council members, and then that will go to the federal agencies for their review and hopefully acceptance, so that it'll be in place by October 1st, which is what the federal requirement is. One of the important parts of identifying clean freight corridors in MPL plans is the fact that these are the plans that set the foundation for potential future federal funding for all kinds of things, including potentially support of clean freight corridors. So this is a way to take what we've been talking about, which is the action plan, how to develop freight corridors, clean freight corridors, and make it part of the planning process. So potentially down the road, federal resources, along with state and local, can be brought to bear on actually establishing the corridors. So that's really where we are in the development of this freight plan. And of course, there are steps after this, which would involve potentially putting some federal planning resources to the designation of, shall we say, supplementary clean freight corridors in our region. And we have to look beyond. I mean, NECFC is 10 counties in basically a 28-county metropolitan region. By some definitions, 31 counties. So we do also have to work with our colleagues in other MPOs that surround us in Connecticut, New Jersey, and to our north, and try to rationalize these corridors regionally as much as possible, so that they are reinforced. So what's happening, say, in New York State on I-95 is also happening in New Jersey on I-95 and so forth. So we have several next steps here, but at least now I believe we have a foundation for moving forward at the regional level with the Clean Freight Corridor program. So Alicia, that's where we are. Happy to take any questions if the time is appropriate.
Wonderful, Jerry, and I know you have to scoot. Thank you so much, and thank you for your partnership and making this happen. We're very pleased to see that it's included in the regional freight plan, and certainly working with you to make that program successful. So thank you so much, Jerry, and thanks for your time.
Sure. Thank you.
As questions arise, we'll make sure we get them to you.
Okay.
Thanks, Jerry.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, next up, and our last presenter for today is David Elder. He is the Supervising Transportation Planner out of the Office of Strategic Planning and Projects under the Bureau of Policy and Planning for the Connecticut Department of Transportation. David, welcome, and go ahead and take it away. David, you're breaking up just a little bit. Oh, David, I don't think we can hear you. Wondering if David may have called through the VoIP, the voice. A little bit better, but you're still sounding a little electronic. Sorry, David. I wonder, David, if it might be helpful to call back in. Okay, great. So maybe what we'll do, while David tries calling in again, and we'll certainly come back to his presentation because he also has an update for us that we're excited to hear about. Maybe, Abby, I know there's a number of questions that have been entered into our question box during the webinar. Maybe we can go to some of them. And hi, is that David?
Did that work? Yes.
Oh, yes, brilliant. Okay, hold off on the questions. We're going to go back to David.
All right, so I'll go
David,
quickly.
go ahead, take away.
And I started to say that's the benefit of going last, as most people on the call already know. So Connecticut DOT, if you could advance to the next slide, please. We did submit an application, and we did work with TCI in terms of coordinating the corridors that went through the region. I think that was a very important effort, and I'm glad that TCI did that so that we could have a network that was a full network throughout the region, so that people could have some consistent signage, and that we knew that you could travel throughout the region, and people would have some level of comfort that they would be able to make it travel a certain distance without the range anxiety. So I'm going to go through some maps. Diane did explain the difference between the signage ready versus the signage pending. I think Connecticut is fortunate to have a rather mature group of stakeholders and partners, and we have a number of facilities. We do have a large amount of EVs charging, which is good. We have a lesser extent of some of the other alternative fuels. If you go to the next slide, you can see that the network will, as I go through these, kind of get smaller and diminish as we change the fuel type. So for hydrogen refueling, we are pending. All of our corridors are pending, and I should say, you know, that these major corridors are also our largest freight corridors as well. So it's consistent with our highest volume of not only freight but also passenger vehicles traveling out through the region. In terms of our actual hydrogen fueling stations, we only have one station, and it's in Middletown, Connecticut, which is appropriately named Middletown because it is right in the middle of the state. But we only have one station in Connecticut, and you can see that this network in particular does not continue north into Massachusetts, but it does go into New York. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. Propane. Propane, we have three facilities, one in Hartford, which is, you can see that on the map, one in Danbury, which is on the western part of the state near the New York border, and then another one in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which again is towards the New York City metro area, kind of Westchester County. But again, we do have one corridor that has been approved for signage, and the others are pending for propane. Go to the next slide, please. compressed natural gas, again, you can see the I-91 corridor. That's the corridor that runs along the shoreline, as well as the I-91 corridor, which goes from New Haven to the state line. It does not go all the way to Springfield, but again, you can see some pending corridors on the what I call the I-84 corridor. And then in terms of compressed natural gas, we do have, I believe we have 8 facilities, 2 in New Haven, 1 in Bridgeport, 3 in Hartford, and then 2 in the eastern part of the state near our casinos. So we have a pretty robust network in terms of the compressed natural gas in the state. Next slide, please. And then in terms of liquefied natural gas, we have no signage ready corridors in the state, but I believe that we do have 1 facility, and that is in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So that's almost in the New York City metro area. And again, I did take these screenshots directly from the FHWA Alternative Fuels website. That is a great resource, and I'm happy that they have taken the initiative of making that data available to all of us, because I think it helps with the stakeholders and certainly with the public to present it in such an accessible way. So I don't think I need to go through these corridors that are on the map, but those corridors are important because they are through state corridors. And as I said, to start with, that our EV network is certainly the most mature of any of the alternative fueling infrastructure we have in the state. You can see a map. These were the stations as of, or the charging stations as of 2016. I do know that my colleague Ben McMillan is on the call. I'm not going to put him on the spot to see how many we now have in 2017, but the Department of Transportation, we do work very closely with our sister agency, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. You know, our role in the establishment and the application was, as Diane also said previously, the application, the facility owner had to be the applicant, which we are for these corridors. And, you know, we worked closely with our folks, with our traffic department inside the unit, or inside the department, and we also wanted to make sure that we were consistent with the MUTCD. And I know that TCI was also working with that on the regional level. But our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection also probably does more in terms of citing these facilities and identifying the need and the geographic distribution, and then we work with them to kind of figure out where our road network can best facilitate the distance between facilities, and where, when we can, where we might own property along these major corridors where stations could go. And I think most people know that there was some federal prohibition to having commercial services in what were rest areas, and I believe that there was some of those prohibitions were relaxed in the FAST Act. I'm not sure if that actually was passed or not, but there was talk of allowing more commercial services for alternative fueling and charging in those facilities, but we do have them in our service plazas, which are not subject to that same prohibition. And next slide, please. One of the things we are doing in terms of propane, a lot of the municipalities in Connecticut have started to, when they bid their contracts for school bus services, they have started to add weighted criteria for alternative fuel powered school bus fleets. So that's where we're seeing the 300 and probably up to 500 by the next year when the school districts go back out for procuring the school bus providers. And that's primarily who's driving that deployment of the propane school buses, or is at the municipal level, not the state agency level. And I think I'll just keep going. We can go to the next slide, please. And that's all for me. And I think I did thank Rick Hanley. I think you probably all know him, but he was not able to attend today, but I know he does participate a lot. So I want to thank Rick for trying to prepare me for this presentation, even though I couldn't attend. Thank you.
Great. David, thank you so much for your update, and thanks for being on our call today and speaking on behalf of Connecticut and Connecticut's progress. This is great. A very good overview, and congratulations on all of your nominations, or your designations rather. This is exciting, and we're certainly looking forward to working with you. We're at the point now, team, we're 11 minutes past the hour. We probably have about 25 minutes for discussion. There were a number of questions that were brought up during the webinar, so maybe, Abby, what we'll do is we'll go to questions that were brought up from our partners calling in, and then we'll get into some of the good discussion questions that you thoughtfully have prepared for our panelists and our participants. That sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Alrighty, let me break this out. Go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, I was just going to read out the questions. Are you working on that too?
Yeah. Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, I'll give you a little rest. So we have a few from Mike Hornsby, and hopefully he'll correct me if I garble something. But he's first of all letting us know that the Tesla semi-truck is going to roll out on September 1st. So that's another opportunity for alt fuel infrastructure for heavy-duty vehicles. He has a question: does signage ready versus signage pending make a difference to VW from their siting perspective? Does anyone among us organizers know how to answer that?
Well, this is Diane. I don't know exactly how to answer that, but I do know that the VW analysis that they did was closely tracked with our maps, of course, the EV map. So, I mean, they are paying attention to the maps on the Alternative Fuel Corridor website. I don't know as much as drilling down if they're looking at, you know, signage ready versus signage pending, but I'm hoping that, you know, they will definitely take the map into consideration as they're, you know, working through their process too.
Okay, that sounds good. Mike had a question specifically for you, Diane. How does the new federal budget affect the alt fuel vehicle corridor program? There's a loaded question.
That is a loaded question, and I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. But on one hand, I mean, it has no funding, so you know, it's not exactly a big target that the new administration you know, would basically say we dislike this and want to end it because there's no money associated with it. So, you know, I just, from where we stand and what we're doing in my office, we continue to march along until or unless someone tells us to stop, and we haven't heard that yet. So, and I'm hoping we, of course, don't hear that at all. But we have every intention of going out this summer with another Federal Register notice. So that's, you know, that's all I know as of today. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, and then this is easier. Mike is asking, is there a deadline for the next round of nominations? I think you went over that.
We'll spell that out in the Federal Register notice. Let's say it goes out sometime, you know, mid to late July. We're looking at, I know, like I said on the webinar, 30 days was not enough to prepare nominations, so hopefully we'll get to a somewhere between a 60 and 90-day prep period. So we'll see what our legal counsel will let us do and what we can work out there.
And then one last one from Mike, which came in after David's presentation. Please send specific reference to relaxation of prohibition of commercial activity on interstates.
Yeah, this is Diane again. There was no relaxation of the prohibition of the Title 23 prohibition in the FAST Act. So as it stands, you know, you can place an alternative fuel facility at a rest area, but you cannot charge for it. It's a prohibition against commercialization of the right-of-way.
I think I remember noticing what I think others were keying off of, but it didn't come to fruition. So nice try, somebody. we had a question from Barry Carr that I didn't know how to answer, and it was specifically for me, but he's left the call, so I'm going to skip that one. Martha Klimas from Bridgeport Port Authority is asking about New York's spacing of EV facilities 2 miles from one another. Does that mean they're all clumped together, or does that mean they're nicely, evenly spread out 2 miles, 2 miles, 2 miles? And I said, we'll have to get with New York DOT to pin that down, because I did my best to interpret their published application. Do you happen to know, Diane, off the top of your head?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
I think they probably would have had to make that case in their application, so at some point in the process. So anyway, we'll follow up with that one. All right, should we resume our slides? No, nothing else in the question box. Oh, actually, here's one from Allison. Sorry, Allison Callahan from Rhode Island. I know this came up the first round of nominations, Diane, but will biodiesel be included in the new designation process?
As far as we know, no, unless something is amended in the FAST Act to include that specific fuel. We just don't have the authority to add a fuel. So that's all I know about that. Let me go back, while I have the phone here, let me go back to the Title 23 prohibition. As I said, there was nothing that happened in the FAST Act that changed that, but I did see in some information coming out in the new administration's 2018 budget on a fact sheet that they were looking to basically do away with that prohibition, because they are interested, the new administration is interested in privatizing a lot of the rest areas. So once again, I don't know what will happen with that, but there is some inclination in the 2018 budget from the administration that they'll be taking, a look at that issue and maybe trying to do something with it.
Ah, okay. The plot thickens. All right, so shall we, I think that's truly it for the questions in the question box. Oh, nope, there's one more from Henry Lamb. Do we have apps that link to EV stations so people know the availability for each EV station?
This is Diane. I don't think there's anything that exists right now, but I know different groups are definitely working on that, including some federal government interaction with Google, and I know that was a high priority in the last administration. I'm hoping that some of that working group still exists and is working on that issue. Obviously, in this day and age, we don't find stations through highway signage. No knock against our signage, but we're more tech savvy and obviously working for our smartphone. So I think there are several working groups trying to get something started there.
Hi, Diane, this is Marcy. I mean, NREL did develop an app that's available for alt fuel stations. So that's already done or available.
But is that, Marcy, I presume that depicts the type of EV charging available?
I think it's based on, based on their database on the AFDC. Yeah, it's got AC level 2. It's on my phone, so it does have the type.
I do know that there are, I don't know if I'm live, this is David Elder. I know that there are apps available for both the iPhone and Android systems, but I believe the content and the stations are developed by user feedback. So I'm not sure of the accuracy of them, but for example, Next Charge is one of them that I'm familiar with. But again, it's based on users providing feedback, so I'm not sure of the reliability of any of the private market apps.
I also think go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm sorry, Marcy, I did realize that there was an app. That this working group, or the effort I was talking about, was taking it one step further, I think, to basically, if there's a alternative fuel facility, looking at availability. Is anyone using it? Is it online, or is it, you know, down for repair, or, you know, something like that? So it takes it a couple steps further. So that's what I meant. Sorry.
And now we have some other folks chiming in via the question pod saying that plugshare.com shows station types and availability, including Jennifer Saponis, who's with the Clean Cities program. So good to know. There's a lot happening.
And I was
going to
add, Abby, that I know like ChargePoint also has their own kind of, if you have an account with them, that you would be able to kind of identify via their mapping system or software where there's available charging infrastructure, and if it's occupied or being used, or, you know, kind of, they even have a kind of a, what do you call it, like a valet type system where it can notify a user when a station's available or when their vehicle's even fully charged. So there's different platforms out there depending on the type of electric vehicle supply equipment.
Good. All right, that's it for the question pod, and we've got a whole 8 minutes left. Why don't we just sort of run through the, I'm having a go-to meeting problem, wouldn't you know? Hold on. Oh, it's back. Good. Why don't we just run through the questions quickly, Alicia, if that's okay, and then
Sure.
We'll open up the floor. So let's see, is that our first question right there, or did we skip?
Yeah, see, when I click out of my administrator box, it moves me around. Sorry about that. Let me make sure I get you back. Okay, here you are.
All right.
First question.
All right. I don't want to read what you can definitely see on the screen, but, you know, basically we want to know how we can help. The Northeast Clean Freight Corridors work group doesn't have any ownership issues. So we want to help those of you who are out there working on the alt fuel corridors and the clean freight corridors issues, the state freight planning efforts, etc. We want to do some legwork for you, do some research for you, gather the right sorts of people to help inform your efforts, facilitate coordination. So keep that in mind. Maybe we can shout out a few ideas at the end, but also feel free to contact any of us separately, and we'll compile and mull over your suggestions. All right, next slide. So one thing that really, and TCI seems to have, and the I-80 folks really seem to have this under control, but to have priorities straight and have sort of synergistic plans in development for applying for funding that's coming along in the very near future, i.e. DERA, or in the slightly more distant future, VW, and other DOT-based funding opportunities that may arise. You know, how can we help you coordinate and communicate so that we can generate some regional priorities and foster coordinated proposals? So, you know, sometimes it's easy because some modes and types of facilities are very location specific, but where there's a spacing issue or a user issue, it might behoove us to do some coordination. Next slide. And then, you know, our work group is focused on freight just because it tends to be a bit neglected. So let's think about how these alt fuel corridors are affecting the freight community, how we need to reach out to our stakeholders to really ground-proof what we might have in mind to serve their needs, to make sure that it will indeed serve their needs. A case in point is truck stop electrification and electric trailer refrigeration unit shore power. Are we coordinating with the folks in charge of the state freight planning processes, which sort of dovetail with the alt fuel corridor designation plan out, to make sure that, you know, everyone's talking to everyone else and that our two different efforts are harmonizing. Next slides. So this is just one example of groping towards synergy between the designated alt fuel corridors and planning for freight facilities. This is Boston MPO's October 2016 technical memo, rest locations for long-distance truck drivers in Massachusetts. And that research identified that the northwest arc of 495 features a distinct gap in truck parking availability, the highest truck volume in the state, and a good place to stop between origins and destinations in the region. So they ascertained, and MassDOT agreed in their own freight planning process, that this is where we need a new truck parking facility. Next slide. And then when you look at the designated corridors map for EV for Massachusetts, all those Massachusetts truck stops we saw in the previous slide and on the northwest of 495 where there's that gap are on EV-ready corridors. So should we think about equipping truck parking areas as they're created or related with shore power to extend electric fueling and no idle layover capability to freight? It could lessen the impacts of such sites on abutters. It could make expanding and creating them more palatable. Should we also think about adding CNG or other fueling that's in demand by freight trucks? We can talk more about this possibility on our June and July webinars. Next slide. And finally, on this effort, this is from some April outreach by MassDOT on their freight plan update. MassDOT is working closely with MassDEP, which prioritizes shore power as a way to reduce emissions from vehicles and facilities. And Gabe Sherman, who's heading the freight update effort, was at our November Clean Corridors meeting and was registered for the call today, although I don't believe he made it. He really gets it, how his freight planning effort and the clean corridors, alt fuel corridors efforts can dovetail. So I was just wanting to show this small example as a way to sort of galvanize us to keep at the freight dimension. Next slide. Okay, so this is where I hand it back to Alicia.
Great. So we just wanted to, this is a lineup of the webinars that are to follow, this being number one. And we want to make sure that we're capturing the information you're looking for, or the needed coordination that you're looking for. So as you look across these different topics that we plan to discuss leading up to our 2017 partners meeting, which by the way tentatively will be September 25th and 26th at the New Jersey Technology Institute, or Institute of Technology, I think rather. So please mark your calendars. We will confirm that with a save the date. We're working out some final logistics, but that's tentatively looking like that will be our date. But take a look at these topics, and certainly you have the PowerPoint presentation available as a download right now off this webinar. We'll make sure to provide today's discussion out to the entire group. I will be sending out an invitation for our next webinar, which will be June 22nd. But if there are any other subtopics that you would like us to cover as you look across these topics, please let us know. And certainly Abby had raised a number of really thoughtful questions, and I know it would be great if we had another hour to go through them at length, because we definitely want to hear from you. But we want to be respectful of your time. We did set this webinar to be 90 minutes. I'm going to provide you our contact information so that you can reach out to the team here, the strategic planning team, with any of your questions, any of your thoughts. Please share them with us. We want to make sure that we're capturing it and sharing it with others. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for your time. Thanks to our presenters for putting the valuable time that you did into your presentations and sharing your updates. We're so excited to be working with you. A special thanks to Abby for all of her coordination and working with the presenters and getting all the PowerPoints together and really just being amazing. We look forward to talking with you on June 22nd as we talk about natural gas and other alternative fuels, biodiesel, and infrastructure as we look at promoting clean transportation in the Northeast along our clean freight corridors. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, long holiday weekend, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thanks again, and have a great day.